you. My name is Spence Flatguard. I'm on the board here, and welcome. And we have viewers from across Mississippi streaming, so welcome to y'all, as well as those of you here at the two museums. We got a special History is Lunch today we're really excited about. Of course, this was the 20th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, that tragic day in our history. And we all remember where we were that day. And this place, our museums tell stories, and we tell all the stories. And we have a special program today that tells a part of that story with Horne. But I wanted to mention, we also have a special exhibit on the mezzanine in between the two museums I hope you all have been to, and if you haven't, I hope you go. It'd probably take you 30 to 40 minutes to go through. Melody Golding shared her photographs with us. Is Melody here? Raise your hand. Hey, Melody. Thank you for being with us. Afterwards, if you have time, she's going to lead a tour of the exhibit. So I recommend that. If you can't make it today and haven't been, it's open until November 7th. So please come back. Governor Barber kicked it off in March. It's a wonderful exhibit. Invite your family and friends. And it's free. And it's free thanks to our good friends at Horne that are the sponsors for it. Thank y'all, Horne. I know we have a big group from Horne. Raise your hand if you're with Horne. Great. Wow, love having y'all. Thank you. We have a special panel here today, and I'll invite those folks to come up to the stage at this time. It's From Crisis to Recovery, Horne's role post-Katrina, and it's a great, fascinating story. I heard a little bit of it on Super Talk this morning, and they worked, and it wasn't just a Mississippi story, but they've taken it nationally, and they've worked with the good folks at MEMA and MDA. I see Chuck Bearman's here. He's here every week at History is Lunch. It's good to have you on the stage, Chuck. No, that's right. A little different, but it's good to have all of y'all. My good friend Timothy Smith, who have been friends with for a long time. We used to work together when we were young, and is going to moderate the panel. I'll let him introduce those folks. But I see different people with MEMA and MDA. If you've ever worked with that agency, raise your hand. A couple of y'all. Thank you for your service. I see Secretary Watson in the back. He's from the coast. Thank you for being here, Secretary Watson. So I'll turn it over to the panel, and I really want to encourage y'all, if you'd like to see it again, you can see it on our website, our YouTube channel, or if you're going to run into people and they're going to say, oh, I missed the panel, wish I'd been there, you can direct them. It's online, so please do that. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Timothy. Thank you.
Hey, guys. Okay, good. Thank you, Spence. Yeah, Spence is, he says we're old. I don't know if that's, I mean, that's kind of true, I guess. So we appreciate everybody being here today. You know, I think everybody kind of in the news, things you see, even in flyers, we're marking this week the 20th anniversary of Katrina. I think, you know, when I think of anniversaries, I think of things that are, you know, like real positives, and certainly there was a lot of devastation with that hurricane, and so I kind of like to think about it more as a commemoration of the event, and then August 30th being the anniversary of the recovery that took place in the state, which really set a benchmark for how recovery has been done in the rest of the United States since. And so we're very proud to be here today. We have people represented by Horne. We have our state officials that we worked with in the recovery process. And so I did want to start, and I have to give Chuck credit for this. I stole this information from him. Give a few Katrina facts, and then I'll let the panel introduce themselves, and then we'll kind of go forward. I also wanted to state that we'll have about 10 minutes at the back end of this for questions and answers. So somebody at about 12:50 will, you know, like whistle or wave at me. We'll try to get to that so we can answer any questions that you guys might have. But so Hurricane Katrina facts. Gulf of Mexico had 55-foot waves registered, and we experienced at a minimum a 28-foot storm surge on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, which is almost unimaginable. 80 miles of coastline essentially destroyed. We had hurricane force winds 150 miles inland. So on August 29th of 2005, my wife was 6 months pregnant with our soon-to-be 20-year-old son. She probably will get mad at me for saying this, but she had failed a blood glucose test, and so we were at St. Dominic's Hospital getting the little drink a Sprite and get your blood taken. And they were letting all non-essential people go from the hospital personnel. I remember us stepping outside and you know, it was probably 70, 80 mile an hour winds then. It's probably 9:30 in the morning. One of us said to the other, I can't remember which, that, you know, if it's this bad here, how bad is it on the coast? And we obviously had no idea. All 82 counties in Mississippi had declared disasters. 49 of the counties had major disaster declarations, which is just crazy. Entire communities were destroyed, Waveland and Bay St. Louis in particular. So this is a jaw-dropping statistic. 46 million cubic yards of debris caused in Mississippi by Hurricane Katrina. So your average dump truck can carry between 10 and 16 cubic yards of material. So you're doing the math, almost 4 million dump truck loads of debris. Average dump truck is 25 to 30 feet long. Rough math, if you stack those end to end, the dump trucks could go from Earth to the moon. That's how much debris was caused by that hurricane, which is almost hard to wrap your mind around. And unfortunately in Mississippi, 235 people lost their lives. We had 100,000 people that were left essentially homeless as a result of the storm. Also on August the 29th of 2005, was supposed to be my first day as a lawyer for the Department of Public Safety. They didn't make me go to work that day. A few days later, we were on the Mississippi Gulf Coast meeting with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement that had set up a command. They expressed to us that in their think tanks in the off season, they didn't think the scope of damage was possible, that they never envisioned a storm of that magnitude. So what we're here to talk about today is something that obviously 20 years later, a group of people that know each other and don't know each other are gathered in downtown Jackson to talk about it. So I think that speaks to the magnitude itself. So going forward, I want to allow the panel to introduce themselves. My grandparents and my grandfather used to say, who are you and who are your people? And so, which is basically, where are you from and what sort of connections do we have? So I'll start with Scott and let everybody else introduce themselves.
There we go. All right. Thank you, Timothy, and thanks for that. So really excited to be here. Thanks for the opportunity. I actually was not with Horne at that time. So my son was 4 days old when Hurricane Katrina struck these shores. And I remember that very vividly because I was working for President Bush then. And so I was at HUD and doing domestic policy and was given the task of being the point for the Gulf Coast at that point. And so I would get home for the midnight feeding and be able to take my son and I would get the bottle going and then I would do emails the rest of the night. So while he was burping and doing all those pieces. So my people are all from Florida, so we are no strangers to hurricanes. I actually lived in a FEMA trailer myself after Hurricane Andrew struck South Dade. So you know, this is something that I think that gets really personal to all of us who survived these types of events. So with that, I'll test it with you.
Hello, I'm Chuck Bearman. I'm the Director of Community Incentives for the Mississippi Development Authority. Before that, I was the Director of Disaster Recovery. Before that, I was the Chief Compliance Officer in Disaster Recovery. I joined MDA in January of 2008, and on August 29th, 2005, I was working as the Chief of Staff for the Secretary of State of Mississippi, and I was desperately on the phone with Governor Barber's legal counsel, Paul Hurst and Colby Lane, trying to postpone a number of special elections that were going to be held the next day, including 3 on the Gulf Coast. And so we were able to get that done, and then I got to drive home in a horrible, horrible storm that had then brewed up in Jackson. It took me over an hour to drive home from the Ladner building out to Madison where I live. So it's a pleasure to be with y'all today.
Good afternoon. I am Alethia Thomas. At the time of the storm, I actually was one of the many people that decided to evacuate at the last minute. We resided in Biloxi, Mississippi at the time. After that, as a result of Katrina, I have been with Horne ever since then and made a career out of disaster recovery. I am also the granddaughter of retired Representative Francis Fredericks and late Representative Isaiah Fredericks.
And good afternoon, my name is Clayton French. I'm the Deputy Director at the Mississippi Emergency Management Agency. A little bit about MEMA to give us some perspective. We're about 160 folks strong. Strong, emphasis strong. So if Governor Reeves says, all right, we want our MEMA folks in the counties helping out, I want to put 3 MEMA folks in every county in the state, there'll be about 26 counties that don't get one. So we're not big, but we're mighty and we coordinate things. So during Katrina, we were probably a little over 100 personnel strong. Now we're up to about 165 personnel strong, but we're a force multiplier.
No doubt. Chuck, we'll stay with you, or Clayton, excuse me. What were your initial impressions when you saw that there was this monster hurricane in the Gulf, and then maybe the day of and the day after? What were your initial impressions?
So I'm probably gonna have to punt this to somebody else because 20 years ago today I was in the Mideast doing a different job dealing with a man-made disaster.
Oh,
so
well,
I'll have to punt that to somebody else.
Well, let's go to Alethia then. She was living it.
My first impression was devastation. My parents also lost their home in Katrina. I also remember an eerie sense of silence. It was almost as if the wind had taken the noise with it. But also in that silence, I also recall a sense of power. And I say that because seeing people come together and neighbors helping neighbors, people helping each other clear debris, there was something to be said in that.
That's great. Scott, give us the perspective you had being in the DC area, a part of the federal government. Give us your perspective on that day.
Well, it's a pretty amazing day. It wasn't just necessarily the day, but it was probably the entire week that I remember sitting on many video. We didn't have Zoom back then. We had VTCs, so video telephone calls. So the VTCs were going literally every few hours, and we were getting updates going into the storm actually hitting. And then within a day, actually 2 days, we were flying down into the Gulf and helocasting all across the area. And I just remember seeing just incredible floods, days later, and just kind of the smell, the heat. It was still hot, right? It was still very, very hot. No power out there, so no one had air conditioning. And just so we sat there in Washington in lots of meetings in Washington, the old executive office building. The president's conference room is the Roosevelt conference room, and I can't tell you how many times we just sat there talking through, different recovery options, different things that, to-do list. And I'll tell you, President Bush was incredibly focused on this. I remember the first day I sat in the Roosevelt conference room and watching him walk in, watching Vice President Cheney walk in, and just the absolute focus they had. And actually Chief of Staff Andy Card. I mean, there was a lot of just genuine concern to bring about that recovery and make sure that all that the federal government could bring was deployed and mustered down there. And I actually had one of my cousin, my cousin was on one of the naval ships that were here, and he was a Navy diver. So his job was to jump out of the airplane, out of the helicopter, and get the rope around somebody and bring them up into the helicopter. So I remember when we were down there, we landed, we went over to the ship, and I went up and I was with the captain of the ship, and I said, hey, can you call up Specialist Marks? And so the captain got on the horn and called up Specialist Marks, and he didn't know I was coming, so he was shaking. And so we sat there, and it was great to see him. But they talked about all the jumps that he'd been on roofs for days and in the water for days. And so I think for us in Washington, it was, how can we help? In what we do, how can we make sure we're staying out of the way, but bringing as much as we can to the fight and getting the people that they need, what everybody needs. And then after that, it was just about, okay, this is going to be a long-term effort. What else do we do now?
I'll pose this question to the group, and I'd love to hear different perspective from everybody if possible. In the days and weeks and months and even years afterwards, what were the biggest challenges that we faced in recovery?
Let me try and tackle that one first. I think that probably the biggest challenge facing this particular disaster recovery effort was the fact that this was unprecedented. Governor Barbour has spoken many times that it was as if a nuclear blast had occurred on Cat Island, with the reverberations sweeping across the entire state. And when you think about it, the number of housing units that were affected, over 220,000 housing units were affected by this disaster, 100,000 people displaced from their homes. All the major economic engines of the Gulf Coast were devastated by this event. People could not go back to work. They could not even get on roads. Roads did not exist. They were covered over with debris. And so the level of disaster was unprecedented. And it called for a new level of response. And I think in many ways, Mississippi set the precedent for long-term recovery in every respect, because we had to address everything. We couldn't just address one element of this disaster. And I think that that's the most critical thing that people need to keep in mind. It's why we created over 14 different programs, and we'll get to community development block grant disaster recovery funds that we administer, but we created over 14 different programs to address all the levels of destruction that occurred, not just in the Gulf Coast, but throughout the entire state.
And if I could add to that, Chuck, just the sheer magnitude and scope of the disaster. And we described about the debris trucks from here to the moon. So the state, MEMA, manages a grant called Public Assistance, which deals with reimbursing government entities, counties and city municipals, for the cost that this disaster's cost them. So this Katrina disaster was a little over $3 billion just in federal reimbursement. I've been with MEMA since 2010, and we have had 27 other major federal declarations. And the total of those 27 is a little over $1 billion. So Katrina was 3 times the sum of the last 27 since Clayton's been with MEMA. So just the sheer magnitude and scope. And one of the messages I usually give to counties right after disaster, we're going to do all the stuff we can to help out, but those community citizens and governments need to understand to never give up hope. Never give up hope, because we will be there to help you, but if you don't have that hope to drive this, we won't get there.
Alethia, do you mind sharing your perspective as certainly a disaster-affected person that came to work and help your citizens, your neighbors? What were the biggest challenges in the beginning, and how did that materialize going forward?
I think from my perspective, it's really, when we talk about the magnitude, is how do we prioritize and how do we ensure that we are making sure that resources are where they need to be in all of the communities, because that's just a major challenge when the magnitude is the size that it is. Everyone is in need. Everyone needs help. Everyone is a priority. And how do you figure that out? And I think we did a really good job of that.
Yeah, I think that what's the old saying, that adversity reveals character, and I think that our state illustrated a lot of character. It's unfortunate that sometimes a disaster it calls us away from our separation politically, but there's no politics when something like this happens. We're all neighbors and we're all friends and we're all family, and we pull in the same direction. And I think Mississippi has shown, and this is kind of an industry, in this industry now, it's a well-known thing that Mississippi set the standard by and through which you recover from major disasters, and that's still present today. And I think that the underpinning of that is the character of this state and the people in this state. Black, white, whatever, we're all in it together and pull in the same direction. That's I think that's one of the hallmarks of this disaster and one of the things that has carried us forward. What were some of the pivotal moments of recovery? I open that up to the group too.
I'll take, so, when you look at the event, immediate aftermath, so the recovery, response and recovery, and then it's sort of the more long-term, how do we put this all back together? And I think, to me, one of the most pivotal things was what you just said. This is a community that came together. And I don't know that people in Mississippi know how much the ability that Mississippi had to come together. That's not just Governor Barber, but certainly Governor Barber was a leader on that. But also Thad Cochran, Trent Lott. I mean, I think the entire delegation came together so completely that when you look at from the moment of the event all the way to what was then the appropriation, there was a first appropriation, I guess, in September, small appropriation, and then there was in December, I remember this vividly because it was just before Christmas, that is when the most significant amount of resources were appropriated by the Congress. And we were talking about this earlier. I will tell you that if it was not for Haley Barber, if it was not for Trent Lott, if it was not for Thad Cochran, and if it was not for the leadership of folks like Chuck, I think that the staff all came together with a single purpose and a single mission, and then they worked to achieve that. And I think Louisiana, Texas, Alabama were all beneficiaries of what the state of the state of Mississippi was able to do by coming together so completely and to really go out there and advocate for the community. And I just, having been on the administration side of that and watching the legislative work was amazing. And just the complete leadership from the state to all of the different parts and say, all right, this is what we need, this is what we're going to go get. And they went and got it. I remember when we had the appropriation, it happened about midnight before Christmas, and one of the appropriation staff members used to be my budget director, and he called me and he said, you are never going to believe what we just did. He said, Haley Barber just made them all create a legislation that said that whatever the state of Mississippi needs to do was exactly what we're going to do. And we were directed. And so, from that, I think a lot of moments led up to that. But I think when you really think about the long-term recovery and how Mississippi has thrived in that response and recovery, it was that appropriation and that total focus by your delegation to make that happen. And there are lots of folks that made that possible. Lots of staffers who probably will never hear, but they were the folks that really helped get that done.
Chuck and Clayton, please describe for the group and for anybody listening or that will listen in the future, what sort of funding streams Mississippi received, maybe amounts, and I think it's been mentioned at least a little vaguely so far. In most of these major disasters, you have a FEMA response, and so you have public assistance and individual assistance, and you have a HUD response, HUD Community Development Block Grant. We say it CDBG-DR, disaster recovery. And so when I got to Horne, I thought I was the dumbest person in the world because I didn't know any of the acronyms. And maybe I am the dumbest person in the world, but I know the acronyms now. CDBG-DR in particular is interesting because these types of storms tend to disproportionately impact low to moderate income individuals living in floodplains and things like that. And so it's a special program because it rebuilds homes for people that gives sustainability to families for a long time. It's one of the best programs, in my opinion, that the federal government has. And so Chuck and Clayton, do you guys mind sharing a little bit of your knowledge around these programs and how they impacted Mississippi after Katrina?
Right. So I don't know that our challenge was so much the funding. It was maybe the control and monitoring of the funding. And as I said earlier, we're not a very large agency at all. And when I put 3 people out in the counties, that means I've got, a couple of administrative assistants and warehouse workers. So we didn't have a lot of talent and expertise to match the magnitude. So we had to hire firms to help us with this grant, Horne being one of them, because we needed that monitoring, that ability to track, because one day there is going to be an accounting of all those funds that were given out and make sure that those the people that got those funds as well. So really the funding wasn't so much, it was just getting the workforce together to get those funds out and hand it out and knowing it was going to stay where it belonged.
So let me talk a little bit about the massive, unprecedented amount of money that the state of Mississippi received through CDBG-DR. As Scott indicated, in December of 2005, so within a very short period of time after Katrina hit and struck our state, Congress awarded the state $5 billion in CDBG-DR funds. That was further supplemented the next year, early in 2006, with another almost $500 million in funds. That is only because, and I think that we're all talking a little bit about the great blessing it was that we had the leadership in place. You talk about, from a historical standpoint, having the right people in the right place at the right time. We had Governor Haley Barbour, who knew the corridors of power better than anybody, I think, in the country at that point in time. You had Senator Thad Cochran, who sat on the Appropriations Committee, who was the chair of the Appropriations Committee at that moment. We had Trent Lott as the United States Senator, having come from his leadership position and still a power within the Senate. And you had our delegation that was all aligned together in this effort. You had state leadership aligned across the board, Republicans and Democrats aligned to secure the funds that were necessary to rebuild Mississippi. And that is the direct result is seen in this $5.4 billion that the state was allocated by Congress. And we immediately set to work to address the issues on the Gulf Coast. And when I say immediately, we had action plans that were approved in February, if I remember right, in February of '06. And that the first programs that we had to deal with were programs to stabilize the situation in the Gulf Coast. And the way that we did that, and dare I mention this, we did compensation grants. We did compensation grants to homeowners on the Gulf Coast who were impacted by the storm. The maximum amount that they could receive was $150,000. There was no requirement to rebuild, but what we got from that was a covenant on those properties to ensure that when they did build back, they were elevating to the necessary standards. They were following hurricane-resistant building codes. They were getting insurance requirements in place. And so that covenant that was on their property was what we really got through the program. And because of that, I think the great success in that is people were allowed to stay on the coast. They were allowed to stay there even though they weren't returning to their jobs, even though they were dealing with the massive recovery efforts individually that they were facing. It gave them a lifeline and allowed them to stay on the Gulf Coast. Such an important program, and that was the first one out the door. We developed all kinds of housing programs. We put in our public housing programs, we rebuilt more units in public housing, 1,833 units than existed before the storm occurred. We did small rental housing programs because we knew the rental population had been so severely impacted. 100% of that was for the benefit of low to moderate income citizens. We were able to address economic recovery. We had a massive program to rebuild the economic infrastructure on the Gulf Coast in innovative ways. And we'll have a chance to talk about some of the incredible projects that we undertook using those dollars. We also rebuilt the major economic engine of the Gulf Coast, which is the Port of Gulfport. And we created in the process over 1,400 new jobs through that process. We actually were able to elevate the port and fortify the port, not only so it would withstand future hurricanes, but so it would protect the city of Gulfport. Remember all that debris and everything that was just lifted off the port and blown into Gulfport, doing incredible damage throughout the city. So we rebuilt water, sewer. We created an entire backbone in the northern part of the lower 3 counties that is paying benefits to this day, moving people from vulnerable areas into more secure locations. These were the things that we had to tackle, again, because the devastation was so immense and so total. And as Clayton said, we could not have done that. We could not have done that on our own with our existing staff. At peak, we had 54 employees in disaster recovery at MDA, 54 employees. So we had to find partners who were willing to work with us, and one of the greatest partners we had was Horne. Horne was a godsend. They were able to go out there and set up all kinds of intake centers. They helped us administer all the programs. And let me just say this while I've got the floor. I'm occupying too much time. But while I've got the floor, let me just say that we delivered all of this with less than 0.1% of fraud occurring in any of our programs. And that is because of everything that we undertook to make sure that we had guardrails up, and all the great folks, like all the folks at Horne who were deployed to handle the enormous amounts of money that was being involved in all the payments and everything else going on. So it's an amazing story. The Mississippi story is really an amazing, miraculous story.
I'm going to pick real quick on a piece of that because you're absolutely right. And I want to kind of build on this too, because there wasn't even a DR back then. So we used the term CDBG DR, so Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery. That didn't exist. It was just CDBG. And so when we say that, here's what that means. It means that Haley Barbour went to Congress and said, hey, I just need money. I don't care how you're going to send it, but we need money in the state. So they used a different program, which they had used in the past. So after Hurricane Andrew, there were a couple of $1 billion that were put in, and that was a long time ago, 1992. There were a couple of $1 billion put into just this program that's for low mod benefit throughout the country, right? So it's not for disaster. It's not like a FEMA statute. It is completely separate. But they said, all right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to put it right there. And before that, so there was in 92 there was money, or 93 really, and then in the year before Katrina, 5 hurricanes hit Florida, and for all those hurricanes, they got $100 million. And that was like that was like dress rehearsal for Katrina, because then when Katrina happened, that was billions. That was, I think at its apex, we were $16.5 billion. And so when you really think about how you took a program that did not really necessarily have this as its mission, and then adapted it to do what Mississippi did. And I'll give you another example of that. So back then, the regulation to implement those dollars is 8 pages long. Now, Horne, fast forward all these years, we've managed over 60 billion of these dollars. The notices and regulations that we deal with today are 130 pages. So from 8 to 130 pages. So if people tell you, oh, bureaucracy, it's not real. It's real. It's real. It's absolutely real. So.
Yeah, I'll say this too, dovetailing off of that, and it's maybe tooting Horne's horn, if you will, no pun intended, but it also speaks to the effect of Katrina across future disasters. So Governor Barbour and his staff and our senators did a miraculous job in getting the funding we needed to recover. At the time, accounting firms were really not any part of disaster recovery, funding or otherwise. Typically engineering firms occupied that space. Governor Barber and his staff, Paul Hurst and others, recognized that we would receive money that was equivalent to or exceeded the yearly budget for the entire state of Mississippi. And if it was not monitored correctly and it was expended poorly, it may bankrupt the state because the federal government will claw back funds. And so he reached out to Horne and to others, and there are other great firms in this state, law firms and otherwise, that played a role in this recovery. So it wasn't exclusively Horne, but he reached out to us. A retired partner of ours now named Brian McDonald played a pivotal role in that. And we took people that are in this room, Diana Harden and Kathy Denman and others that were accountants at Horne, and literally setting up trailers in Waveland and eventually moving into the convention center in Biloxi alongside our friends at MDA and MEMA and FEMA and the National Guard and DPS and others, and took it upon our collective selves to get, kind of pull the coast up from the ground and dust ourselves off. But people think about the coast, again, I'll repeat, 82 counties, all 82 counties had disaster declarations. So we had people working in the convention center on the coast. They may be dealing with Tishomingo County or Grenada County or DeSoto County because of the scope of that storm, which is just, it's kind of crazy when you think about it. So moving on, Alethia, I'm going to ask you this because you were very, very close to the storm, both physically in disaster effect, but also in work. How did you stay motivated through not only through the months, but the years of Katrina recovery?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one way, and I'll back up when you talked about what were pivotal moments. So there were so many. We've talked about obtaining the funding. We've talked about the number of programs that we designed. But to drill down with that, and this ties into how I was able to stay motivated, is seeing us move from response to the long-term recovery. When you start to see the fruits of your labor, when you start to see all the hours that we spent designing programs to make sure that we were able to help people get back on their feet and help businesses come back to be sustainable, when you start to see it, when you see visibly how people are going back to having hope, how people are getting back into their homes, and you hear their stories. So that is how I stay motivated with my colleagues, with being able to see when we reopen schools, when roads are rebuilt, the sense of joy and pride that brought to the people and the families around us.
Yeah, that's great. If you guys are not, if you're not familiar with the current state of the Mississippi Gulf Coast, you're missing out. Absolute hidden gem. And encourage you to go see the fruits of the labor of a lot of folks. And so, we'd be remiss, and we've talked a lot about the guy, deservedly so, remiss if we didn't talk about Haley Barber and his leadership. I'm going to steal a Haley Barber story that he told at the opening of the exhibit upstairs. I think this is a good, not only a cool story, but a good lesson in the way things are supposed to work. He had traveled to D.C. multiple times after the storm, was in Congress. He had put together a plan. He and his team, Senators Cochran and Lott, had signed off on it. Other members of the Republican delegation had signed off on it. Haley's walking through the U.S. Capitol, and he hears somebody call his name from the side. And he looks over, and it's Barney Frank. So Barney Frank, longtime leader, senator in the Democrat Party, a lot of power, a lot of effect. And he asked Haley, he said, how things going and what can we do to help? And Haley's response was, we just kind of finalized our plan for funding. And Senator Frank said, okay, he said, well, send it to me. He's like, I don't have to read it because we're going to support it. And he was going to gather the support for it. So there was I think one of the attributes of Haley Barbour, in my opinion, and I worked alongside him in a different capacity for a period of time for a state agency, is his ability to go across the aisle and get what he needed to get done, but also concede where he needed to concede as well. And so I asked the group, I asked Scott and anybody that wants to chime in, what were your thoughts on Haley and his team and their leadership through the storm?
Yeah, I think that's a great, it's a great question. I think a great point. So it was Congressman Frank. So Barney Frank was a member of the House from Boston. I mean, as far left as you could come. And so to have somebody like Haley Barbour and Barney Frank reach agreement and compromise, and for Barney to go up there and say to the governor, hey, we're going to support you. I mean, that's a big deal. That's a really big deal, and it's really rare. But there are so many great stories. I'm going to tell you, and I think as great as Governor Barbour was, and I remember one of my stories is him talking about, well, sometimes you got to turn Mama's picture to the wall, and that was a signal that we are going to war, we're going to go to battle, and we don't want Mom seeing what we're about to do. We're going to go out there and really fight for this. So I watched him, really work those rooms in the White House and over in Congress. It was just amazing. But we talked about it before. Terry Hudson, Jim Perry, who worked for the governor, and they were the ones that just kept coming back and coming back and coming back and trying to make sure that the things that when Governor Barbour would get an agreement on something, it was Terry and Jim that were out there making sure that it got followed up on. And I think those are the types of things that you don't really hear about when you think about, all you see is some of the results, but there's a lot of work that goes into making that sausage. And I think, Marie Thomas from, now Marie Sanderson from Senator Cochran's office, just really amazing advocates for the state. And so for someone, I come from Florida, I lived in Washington I've lived in Washington for many, many years, to see just such advocacy and unity by a delegation, I've never seen that again. And I've been up there for, a long time.
So we have just a few minutes left. Now, I want everybody to answer this question in their own individual way. So you guys know we have a large audience here. I presume that we have others watching online. There'll be others that see recordings of this. And the internet's forever, so.
That's scary.
If you're speaking to the audience now or somebody that watches this 50 years from now, what is the one thing that you want them to know about Hurricane Katrina and the recovery? Clayton, we'll start with you.
And I think I might be returning to that same message. We're here because Haley Barbour had hope and a desire. Our coast and our state is still here because people believed it. And so they laced up their boots. They went to work. And we probably take too much credit on our aspect of the things, the successes out there, but it's the locals that says, I'm not giving up my home. I'm not giving up the way my place is. And so I think the sheer desire to be a Mississippian where you are goes a long way.
Alethia?
I think for me, I would hope that people remember that Hurricane Katrina didn't just, the people of Mississippi didn't just survive Hurricane Katrina, that the people of Mississippi rebuilt after Katrina, and we did that together. And that's what I hope that everyone remembers.
I can only echo what has been said before. I love what Governor Barbour said I believe it was in his special session before the legislature, where he said that in every disaster, there is opportunity. And that sounds horrible coming from this horrific tragedy that occurred, but yet there was opportunity for us to rebuild better than what the coast was before. And I would echo what has already been said, that disasters, first of all, are unique to each area. You can have the same event and it result in totally different ramifications for each local community. So that's first. And so you have to be innovative. You have to be creative in using this money and making sure that you're really addressing the local needs that are there. And the second thing is, it is a local recovery process. I think that's why Governor Barbour engaged first out of the bat with the charrette process. Do y'all remember the charrette process? And that was to involve the local community in what disaster recovery meant for that community. And that's the key to really rebuilding successfully, I think. It's not a top-down process. It is something driven by the local community and what the local needs are. And to do that through a creative process.
Scott?
Yeah, I think all of the things that were said, I would associate myself with those. But I would say that I think, Secretary Alphonso Jackson really gave that same guidance, which was support. We're in a role in the federal government, we're there to support and make sure that we are stepping with. And I think when you look at what I would hope is that people look back and see this is what happens when government can work and is allowed to do what it does best, which is really step in times of need like this. And again, I think it's just an amazing testament to the staff of the governor, the staff of the federal government, how everybody came together to really develop a plan that could work locally.
That's good. One thing before I forget, you guys saw a snippet of a video that we've put together. We conducted a lot of interviews for a long period of time, gracious people that listened to my monotone voice, ask them questions. And so Horne, I believe Friday, correct me if I'm wrong, will release a long form video that's roughly 10 minutes long. Interestingly, the images of debris and things that you saw a moment ago are from some of our own teammates in videos that they took in the aftermath of the disaster. But on social media, on Horne's website, probably other sites too, you'll see a longer video that has some really neat, unique insight, including from Governor Haley Barbour. And last thing before we turn it over for Q&A, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't say this. One of the things that I learned in conducting, I think, 20 or 30 interviews with people that were a part of the recovery effort is that everybody has a similar story and everybody has a different, unique experience. And so that's the way disasters work. We have a common perception, and we also have our own unique ability, and things affect us in different ways. And as a native Mississippian and a person that would not be sitting in this room but for Hurricane Katrina, it created frankly a job for me to go and hopefully help others around the country, and Scott and Alethia are the same. The same ethos and the same types of people, the same character that existed 20 years ago in the state still exists now. And God forbid another disaster happen. We have the blueprint for recovery, but that blueprint's underpinning, in my opinion, is the character of the people of the state. And so I just want to remind you guys of that. It's easy to turn the news on and get very frustrated. We all do it. We're all made in God's image. We're all here sharing this space together, and we're each other's stewards. And so you're saddened by the storm, you're happy about the recovery, but I'm reminded, I think we all are, of what a unique place Mississippi is, what unique people Mississippians are, and reminded of our character, and that makes me really happy. So we appreciate all you guys being here today. We'll open it up to questions.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you'll raise your hand, I'll bring the microphone around to you.
Excellent presentation, and I remember the days well. But one thing I think you missed on Haley Barbour, Haley made sure that Congress got, or the Mississippi got to Congress's attention, while the nation was focused on New Orleans. I mean, New Orleans is a favorite destination for Americans, and it's amazing that Haley Barbour was able to see that Mississippi was not slighted.
Yeah, and like I said before, I think that's a great point. And look at the resources that Louisiana got, and I'm going to tell you, I was there. I watched everything, and I was a part of all of that. I don't think that Louisiana would have received as much assistance as it received had Haley Barbour not had the foresight to go out there and advocate for Mississippi and come up with a plan to actually do it, right? So, and how he did it. So I think this is Mississippi exporting its expertise to the surrounding states and neighbors.
Thank you. I
Any
think
other
you
questions?
guys did an excellent job, and you should be commended for the great work that brought about the recovery that is so well done. I myself, I'm not a scientist, but from time to time I hear on the news that some indication of global warming. And I was just wondering if Katrina was not a sign and indication of global warming. And I just wonder if we, rebuilding in the same area, the coastal area, when it is likely that if this was an indication of global warming, why are we building back in the same place? Why not build away from the coast and rebuild in the inland instead of building along rebuilding on the coast, which the same results, the same kind of situation will happen again. If this is an indication of global warming, I don't know. I'm not a scientist. I just wonder.
I can't speak to global warming, and other maybe my voice is so monotone it's killing my mic, but I think it's an interesting question, and one of the programs that is administered through the federal government is called the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, which is so when homes are rebuilt, when government buildings are rebuilt, when roads are rebuilt, bridges rebuilt, that infrastructure is hardened, houses are raised, buildings are raised, retaining walls are built, and other mechanisms to guard against recurrent storms. And so, hurricanes have been around, I think, as long as we have, and they'll be here long after we're gone. But there are programs, and that thought is carried out in the expenditure of funds, sinking, putting power lines underground and things of that nature. So that's a very good question. There are mitigation efforts to do that. Chuck, I don't know if you want to respond to that too.
Yeah, let me just say that I like to say all the time that Mississippi was rebuilding with resiliency and mitigation before resiliency and mitigation was cool. That is now a requirement for all CDBG-DR funds that 15% of the funds have to be utilized for resiliency and mitigation. The bulk of all the programs that were undertaken by MDA, including those involving, again, housing, reconstruction and rebuilding, infrastructure, and all those things were all done with resiliency and mitigation in mind. We were doing things to harden facilities and to make sure that there was a measure of resiliency built into everything that we did. We talked about elevating homes. We talked about elevating the port. Port of Gulfport's a perfect example because it's been hit a couple of times by hurricanes since we rebuilt, and the port was back up and operational in a matter of days, not a matter of months. And I think that that's a testament to the work that we did, which again, in my humble opinion, set the precedent at HUD for dealing with these funds. Can I take just one more minute? Because I would be remiss if I didn't say this. First of all, again, none of this is done without great partnerships. That's partnerships in the private sector, like with Horne. It's partnerships in the public sector, partnering with great offices like the Secretary of State's office, but also partnering with the Mississippi Department of Archives and History. They were an incredible partner in all of this. They are an important required component in all of our environmental processes, but they were partners in our recovery and our rebuilding effort. Folks like Jennifer Bond, who was here earlier, Jim Woodrick, Ken Papoul and former director Hank Holmes were just invaluable in their support of everything that we were doing. And I would be really remiss if I didn't identify for y'all the folks who are here from MDA. These folks were the program managers and directors for all of our recovery efforts. They have immense experience since Hurricane Katrina, and I'd like for them to just stand up and receive a round of applause because they did amazing work.
My question is related to the previous two questions. But one is, this is not a question, it's just an observation. I know a young man who is still afraid to go to New Orleans because of Katrina and because he feels that, well, he says it took 8 days for the president to go there. Now, people who are not privy to forums such as this and who don't have all information about what goes into a recovery process don't know about the different agencies that are involved in the process. And so we're only familiar with when the president shows up and what FEMA's doing. And so my question is, which is more important or that has most impact? Local, state, federal?
I think that's a great question. First off, let me just say, though, about President Bush, I think whenever a president goes someplace, whenever they go, it means that local infrastructure has to support the president when he gets there. So when the president doesn't go right away, it's because the president says, I don't want to stop the recovery. I don't want to stop the police. I don't want to stop all of the folks that are carrying out the recovery. They would have to stop and go out there and to support his arrival. And so a lot of times that is really the driving force of that. So when a president doesn't jump right down into a disaster area, it's because the president knows that I really want to let the people recover first, and then I'm going to go down there and I'm going to use my voice to help bring that support. But I think when it comes to which are the beauty of our system of government is that, and for recovery, is that it starts locally. When the locals can no longer carry the load, it goes to the state. When the state's glass is full and overflowing, it goes to the federal government. And I think that is really the magic of how we work as a nation, that it is about support and not dictating what should occur, what you should do as a local government. So I think there's a lot of programs out there, and part of what we do at Horne is make sure that everybody knows, and we publicize, we spend a lot of time, energy, and effort to getting the word out there when there is assistance, so that everybody knows what's available, and that we say it in many, many languages. You'd be surprised at how many languages we have translated a lot of the assistance that's available out there. But we want to make sure everyone knows, because if someone doesn't know what help they could have gotten, then we failed. And so we work really hard to make sure that everyone is aware of it. So.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the top of another History is Lunch. Let's give our panel a round of applause. We are incredibly grateful for the support of Horne and helping sponsor the exhibit. If you have not gone upstairs, I highly recommend you making your way upstairs before you leave today. November 7th is the final day of this exhibit. On display, Hurricane Katrina, Mississippi Remembers, photographs by Melody Golding. Melody is in the audience today. She and I actually afterwards are going upstairs to lead a tour of the space for about a half an hour. And so I highly recommend stop by, see that exhibit, come back, join us again next week at noon on Wednesday for History is Lunch. We're so glad to have you guys with us. Let's give one more round of applause for Timothy Smith, Scott Keller, Alethia Thomas, Clayton French, and Chuck Bearman.